Continuing our important things that you need to pay attention to examination. Okay, for fourth question, normally it will be a case or another issue that involves someone committing a fraud. That someone can be a employee or a management level person that are doing something wrong. And in the examination, if you come across with such an audit issue, basically the response or the assessment of the risk of material misstatement will actually basically the same as what you have learned in the past lecture and going through those past questions. But when it comes to fraud, and in this question or in the case when you feel that the question is actually going to the direction of saying something related fraud, you will have to add some additional risk factors or some additional responses specifically for dealing with fraud and some non-compliance and laws and regulation situation. And NOCLA are very similar to fraud and also similar to litigation and claims, because this type of situation, they are always interrelated, and one issue can cause you have a multiple response. So you need to see if the question is looking for normal risk of material misstatement assessment and response on audit procedures, or rather it is going to or it requires you to particular response with fraud related terms in order to get some marks. So in the examination, you will have to know some basic definition related to fraud. So for example, what actually is a fraud, and it's an intentional act. Of course, this is just definition, but in the examination, whether the question mentions something is intentional or not, you need to read it by yourself through going through different case facts. If you find that the audit issue is intentional, then the question will likely be going to the fraud direction. If it is just normally saying something like the account clerk make an error on something, so if it mentions it's an error, it's an unintentional mistake or something wrong with reconciliation, something wrong between reconciliation two documents that lead to certain kind of material misstatement, then it will more likely a normal risk of material misstatement question. And you need to know these two terms. You must know these two terms: fraudulent financial reporting and misappropriation of asset. You will need to able to tell the differences of these two, because the handling of a fraudulent financial reporting versus the handling of misappropriation asset are slightly different. Especially for fraudulent financial reporting, it will be, you will need to mention something like this, okay, management override of control. Basically, management is in the unique position to commit a fraudulent financial reporting. If it is just a normal employee or it is a normal account clerk, it is unlikely for that employee being able to commit a fraudulent financial reporting. But sometimes you need to tell the differences. For example, misappropriation of asset. If you mention that, for example, an account clerk, he or she tried to do this. He or she, the clerk, the account clerk, which is a junior staff, he created some fictitious employees, and then they issue some salary payments or bonuses, whatever, to these fictitious employees. And after he or she do something like that, he or she try to conceal this misappropriation of asset. And then he or she creates some fake documents, created a fake bank reconciliation, or he or she do something on the documents to try to conceal the fact that he or she actually steal some money or from the company. In this case, some of you will easily confuse between fraudulent financial reporting and misappropriation of asset. You need to know the fundamental reason for that for the act. So the act is the account clerk is actually trying to steal money from the company. That's the fundamental fact. He or she then create some fake documents, because creating fake documents is something what you do for financial reporting. Okay, so this is the confusion part. When the question asks you to name whether the type of fraud, for example, the question asks you the type of fraud, you will have to name that, obviously. But sometimes the question will be just asking you is this a fraud? Does it constitute a fraud for our consideration or the impact on our audit planning, something like that? You will have to, whatever kind of question trying to help ask you, whatever terms or the question structure are, you will have to name this in your answer. You will likely be able to name it. If you name it incorrectly, you probably will lose the marks for the whole question, because you as an auditor, you need to tell the differences. So you have to look for a term in the case some manager, okay, or above. In Module 13 examination, the title of a person is always important. No matter you are dealing with a question in code of ethics, or you are dealing with a question in risk of material misstatement, fraud or error, if you find that or you see that it mentions a manager do something, whatever manager, it can be a finance manager, obviously related to finance department, but if you mention like the human resources manager or even the IT manager, then that person is a management, okay? If he or she do something wrong, it is a management override of control. Of course, I'm talking about he or she do something on fraudulent financial reporting, okay? But for fraudulent financial reporting, it will likely be some manager, or what we usually, the title we usually use in the finance department is like finance sole controller, finance director, it's like FC or FD. This is mean or above, okay? Manager or above, or simply a finance manager that commit something, and the purpose is to like because he or she is entitled to a bonus which is linked to the performance of the company. If the revenue or the share price, I should say revenue, if the revenue or the expenses of a company increase a certain percentage or the expenses decreased a certain percentage, he or she will entitled to a certain amount of bonus. And because of this reason, he or she try to create some fake revenue or try to do something to reduce expenses. For example, I changed the useful life of fixed asset from 10 years to like 30 years. Then the depreciation expenses will drop and the revenue or profit of the company will increase. And then he or she will entitled to more bonuses. Then that is a financial reporting, for fraudulent financial reporting. For misappropriation of asset, there must be some kind of asset being stolen or being abused. Okay, it can be a physical asset or intellectual property. In the fraudulent financial reporting, there will likely be no assets involved in fraudulent financial reporting. So when you look at the case facts, you will need to quickly identify the differences, because the main differences will be management override of control. If in your answer you determine that the fraud is a fraudulent financial reporting, there's like 90% of the chance your answer will need to mention management override of controls. But of course, that's depend on the actual situation. Okay, that's what you need to train yourself when you read different past paper. You have to know how to analyze your case fact for you to tell whether it is fraudulent financial reporting or misappropriation asset. Because if it is a fraudulent financial reporting, there's management override of control, it will further lead to further consideration, such as some kind of management bias or even management integrity. Okay, because in this situation, we found that the integrity of the management of this company is in doubt. Therefore, we may not be able to trust other information or other representation or other documents or information that were provided by these management personnel. Okay, then it actually create an impact on, of course, on risk of material misstatement, right? But it also affect the risk of material misstatement at financial statement level and assertion level. Assertion level is easy. For example, if my example just now, the finance manager try to change the depreciation of, change the useful life of the asset because he or she need to reduce the depreciation expenses. Then the assertion level, which will be on the PPE, right? For our triangle we talk about, okay, you need to identify the financial statement caption. So at assertion level, it will be PPE, right? Because depreciation, but we still need to cover the part on risk of material misstatement at the overall financial statement level, because other than PPE, there may be other management override of control or other fraudulent financial reporting in other area of the financial statement, because we are questioning the integrity of the management. Therefore, your answer will be like more high level and a more broad sites of the whole event. Okay, but for misappropriation of asset, for example, this case, there's a fictitious employee. Then the assertion most likely will be on assertion level material misstatement. For example, cash and the salary expenses. Okay, the cash is actually understated and the salary expenses is overstated. Okay, so this is more on assertion level because the incidents are likely due to a certain a cash or salary only. But it can be other things, or maybe he or she stole a car from the company, and that's some tricky part. Not just stealing something from the company. If you use it for personal use, you use the company car to like pick up his or her kids after school, but using the company car, then it can be and it's still a misappropriation of assets. So you need to understand the terms here. Okay, it involves some kind of asset. Abusing company asset or stealing company asset are both misappropriation of asset. You need to note this point. And again, you will need to use this term in your answer. Okay. You probably will see this term in the question itself. The question may be if the examiner is good enough for that year, the question may be like, is this a fraudulent financial reporting or misappropriation of asset? If it is asking this way, of course you need to answer the question. But even if not as specific, you still need to name this term. Okay. I already mentioned a couple of times that you need to memorize the term. What is it about and how to identify it in the examination. This is very important. Okay. And next, sometimes the question will be on fraud triangle. What is the fraud triangle talking about? Is that motivation, opportunity, and ability to rationalize the crime. Because of these three elements, if these elements exist, then there will likely be fraud happening within that company. These three items, and your focus point will always be these two. It's less likely there will be a question talking about rationalization. Rationalization is talking about like the mindset of someone. It's like if I didn't do it, someone else will. If I didn't steal the money, someone else will still do it. This is how we rationalize our crime. Okay, everybody is doing it, so I might just join them. Okay, this is talking about the ability to rationalize the crime. But in the examination, when you look at case facts, the case facts will likely involving related to motivation and opportunity. And there are always two types of motivation. We're talking about incentive or pleasure. So sometimes a student will confuse the fraud triangle. You guys will confuse and think that the fraud triangle are actually incentive, pleasure, and opportunity. No, if the question actually asks you what is a fraud triangle, it happens in the past. Okay, fraud triangle is motivation, opportunity, and rationalization. But if the question comes to a stage 2A question, for example, it asks you to assess the risk of material misstatement due to fraud, you will likely see this term within the question itself. Then you obviously know the question wants you to talk about some factors that are related to fraud. And you always, in the case, we will be looking for incentive or pressure. The most common type of incentive is what I just mentioned when I talk about fraudulent financial reporting. Some kind of bonus to management personnel. Okay? If the question mentioned the company got a bonus scheme that are related to performance of the company, then there's like 50 or 60% chance the question will be about fraud. Okay, of course, it can be a normal risk of material assessment at financial statement level question. You will have to mention that too, because no matter if it's fraud or error, it's still a risk of material misstatement. And for pressure, the most common type of pressure is IPO. It's talking about the company is going to be listed in 2 years, saying the founders or the management are targeting to list the company on Hong Kong Stock Exchange in 2 years. Then this is pressure because they need a very good financial statement to show the investor this is worthy to join our IPO, to buy our shares. And of course, not just in 2 or 3 years an IPO, it can be just listed. Okay, the question will mention something like the company just listed in last year, 2020, November, it was listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Because it is the first year or first few years of a list of the company go listed, there will still be pressure for the company to present a good financial statement. That is how you explain the risk. Because the company are just listed, because it's going to be IPO, therefore we concern that there may be a risk of fraud because there are incentives or either incentive or pressure that happens in the case. Okay, so for motivation part, you can see bonus or IPO. This part most likely will be related to fraudulent financial reporting. For opportunity, it will likely more related to misappropriation of asset. Okay, but of course, why I won't tie this to FFR? It's still related to FFR. Who's got the opportunity to commit fraudulent financial reporting? Management. management is in a unique position to override any control and create fake sales, management bias on depreciation expenses, or any judgment that are involved by the individual. Therefore, you will need to look at the case fact carefully and try to describe how this is a factor that will increase the risk of material misstatement due to fraud. Okay? An opportunity, if other than a management personnel who is in a position to commit fraud. For example, just now I mentioned the account clerk, he or she is responsible for calculation of salary and payment of salary. Because his or her responsibility is also in a unique position for him or her to create fictitious employee and to get fake salary from the company. There's sometimes here opportunities because something that related to internal control, and I would call it an ICD. IC is internal control. Then what is ICD? Internal control deficiency. Remember, we used to talk about internal control, and there are some items I asked you to remember. Those are what I call internal control, keywords for internal control. Okay, those internal control keywords, as for example, segregation of duties. Because there are no segregation of duties, the account clerk is responsible for the calculation of the salary and the payment of the salary. There's no segregation of duties there. Because of this internal control deficiency, or because there are no segregation of duties, it creates an opportunity for the account clerk to commit a misappropriation of asset. Okay, so bear with me. I'm trying to teach you how to describe an issue that you already learned about. For example, bonus, IPO, segregation of duties, something like that. Or other control keyword, we can be like, we talk about something like physical assets control, right? Because the cash are not kept in a locked box, are not kept in the safe, then it is opportunity for someone to steal the cash out from the out in the opening, okay, or the clerk just put the cash in the sofa cabinet, and then the cabinet has got no lock, so everyone walk by it or desk can take the money away. That's opportunity to commit. When it comes to a question asking you to assess ROMM due to fraud, you will need to put this case fact and add this incentive and pressure and opportunity into your answer for you to be able to describe it as a risk that will lead to some kind of misappropriation of asset or fraudulent financial reporting. Okay, there will less likely be question on this part because it's talking about the attitude or character of a certain person. So it's hard to describe this in the examination. So you less likely see this in the case fact, but it will be either incentive, pressure, or opportunity. Always focus your answer. Always start planning your answer from this starting point here. Okay, what in the case fact constitute an incentive, pressure, or opportunity? That's how you get marks for a question that are related to fraud. Of course, I keep telling you, when you read the question, you need to successfully identify the question and link it to a specific topic. For example, if the question you identify is fraud, then you will need to mention these items here. And as I mentioned just now, it will likely be mixed together with a normal risk of material misstatement triangle question. Okay, but you will need to know whether this is normal, error only. Okay, assertions, financial statement caption, or it actually got a fraud-related explanation or fraud-related case facts that you need to consider. That's very important. You need to identify this item before you start planning your answer. Okay, and here this part is on responsibility of on fraud, different responsibility. Sometimes the question will ask you, is the auditor responsible for detecting or prevention of fraud, or say a statement or mention a statement, or someone or your audit junior say something, or your client say something like the auditor is responsible for prevention and detection of fraud, and ask your comment on this statement. Then of course it's no. It's always rests with management or those charged with governance. Okay, so you will have to mention that the objectives or the responsibility of the auditor are actually here: identify and assess the risk of material of the financial statement, obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence regarding the assessed risk of material misstatement, and implementing appropriate response, etc., etc. And the only difference from what we learned is actually adding this to the sentences. Okay, the yellow part is what you already learned before. Okay, But for fraud, you will need to, if the question is identified as a fraud related question, then if you mention the objective something, you will need to add this wording in your answer. So basically, you have already learned everything here, but I'm just adding additional few words into the sentences that you need to answer. And when are you going to add these sentences is when you identify a question other than our triangle, you are identify it as a fraud related question. You will likely be mention something like this. If you mention the objectives of the auditor, it's basically the same. I'm just adding fraud into it. All right. And this part is talking about professional skepticism. It's a definition that may asked by your examiner, but it's already here. So if it mentioned, ask you what is a professional skepticism, or when an auditor needs to maintain professional skepticism, this is you need to mention something like this here, the importance of professional skepticism. And we as auditor, we always need to maintain our professional skepticism. Okay, that's why I always ask you guys not to trust anything said by the client within the examination. Okay, anything in the case that the client says something is most likely incorrect, or there's some kind of tricks that we need to handle. All right. So next part here. This part is called talking about presumed risk of fraud and significant risk. What is this? First of all, if the question is about revenue, so to do it more properly, it will be a risk of material misstatement question, our triangle, and the financial statement is talking about revenue. And specifically, it will be related to the occurrence assertion of a certain revenue. What is meant by occurrence is whether that transaction actually occurred or not. Okay, so to put it in a fraud-related way, is that is the revenue, the transaction that created the revenue is real or fake? If it is fake, then it is a fraud problem. A fraud problem, it means if it is fraud and it is a fake revenue, then it means it never occurred. The transaction never occurred, so it's a fake transaction. Okay? So the presumed risk is talking about that we presume the revenue of any client. There's a presumed fraud risk for one of the process of our client is revenue recognition. We presume that there's a risk of fraud. Okay, so most of the time, if the question is talking about occurrence and revenue, you can see or you need to pay attention whether the question is related to fraud. So if the question is a normal RMM revenue, it can be just an error question. Okay, but if you feel that or any indication that it actually leads you to identify both this in your question, then you will need to mention something called the presumed risk of fraud. Okay, there's a situation that lets you rebut this presumption. It's a rebuttable presumption. So you can say there are no risk of fraud for a particular client, but you will have to have a strong support for such a rebuttable presumption. Okay, if you want to rebut such a presumption, you've got a strong case. For example, it is a rental, or I should say, this is a property management company. Okay, management company. Its main source of income is rental. It helps like some office building. For example, to put it simple, this company only hold one apartment. Okay, and the only revenue source of this company is renting this apartment out. For example, it's $10,000 monthly rent. So the only revenue is $10,000 times 12 months. The total revenue of that company will be $120,000 each year. Then you can say there is no risk of fraud because that is the only revenue source and the revenue is fixed at 12 months is $120,000. There's no opportunity of any other fraud on the revenue recognition process. If the situation is like this, you can say something that there you can rebut the presumed risk of fraud in a during examination. So you need to look for the situation. This is a very particular case facts that you have to look for. If the revenue is basically come from a fixed source and there's no complicated calculation, no whatever judgment involved, you can say there's no presumed risk of fraud. But of course, in examination, this situation, you can say almost never really happen. So most of the time, the risk of fraud are always presumed, and there will be risk of fraud when the question talking about occurrence of revenue. Okay, so you need to pay attention to this point. And the second presumed risk related to fraud are management override of internal control. That's what we talked about just now on fraudulent financial reporting. Remember, okay, because we assume or presume that management is in a unique position to override the internal control or commit fraudulent financial reporting. So these two areas, when we perform assessment of risk of material misstatement, it is always significant risk on these two areas. Okay, so if the question you need to look for in the case facts and in the question whether these terms actually appears in the case facts or in the question. If you see this word, especially management override of internal control in the question, you can say like 99% that question is related to fraud. Okay, that's how you stamp this fraud. Okay, stamp on your question. Okay, how you pinpoint the question to fraud. If you see wordings like this in the examination, and it is significant risk. And here it tells you, okay, how to identify significant risk and how you respond to significant risk. And your answer is basically here. The question asks you how to respond to significant risk. Okay? And do remember one thing. When you do a risk of material misstatement triangle or do an assessment, the official answer or the official suggestion is high, moderate, or low for a risk of material misstatement. It's either high, moderate, or low. But of course, as I think I already mentioned several times, don't go medium or moderate. You either go high or you either go low. If a question is related to revenue, occurrence of revenue, and if the case fact mentions something related to misappropriation of asset or fraudulent financial reporting, the risk of material misstatement must be assessed as high. And if it linked to revenue recognition, or if the question mentioned any things related to overall control, you will automatically turn the assessment from high to significant risk. Okay? Significant risk is actually another level of risk of material misstatement, which is actually higher than high. Okay? When you go high, if you need to go higher, then it is significant risk. Some of you sometimes will got a confusion. When should I mention significant risk in the examination? This is a professional judgment. And when it's come to professional judgment, you guys are just confused, okay? So I'm telling you, if the question not mentioning anything related to fraud, basically you never go to significant risk when you do an assessment. Because sometimes you guys suddenly just automatically go to significant risk because the case fact mentioned something so bad, and I don't know why you guys tend to like, oh, that's a significant risk. But yes, you assess it as significant risk as a professional judgment, okay. But the problem is when you structure your answer, you didn't mention how to handle significant risk. And honestly, if I ask you now, you don't know how to handle significant risk as an auditor, right? Do you? No. You maybe find something to copy it down here from the LP, from my exam guide. But the only problem is, did you identify the risk correctly? Is it a high risk or significant risk? Therefore, do not go to significant risk unless it's something related to fraud or management override of control, something like that. Okay, you only go to significant risk when the situation involves fraud and management override of control. Here, okay, I need to draw your attention to something. We already learned about the audit approach, and there are only two audit approach, right? Remember, combined approach and substantive approach. And for significant risk, okay, we're talking significant risk, response to significant risk. If there's a fraud situation happen, or there's something related to management overall of control, or it can be a revenue recognition problem or misappropriation of asset, then it will lead you to say something like significant risk. Some of you, I don't know why, automatically go to substantive approach when the question is related to significant risk. Sometimes the question will be like this. You will explicitly mention in the question that your team or your manager already assessed the risk of material misstatement of something as a significant risk. Okay, so the question is not asking you to do the assessment. It already tells you it is significant risk, so you don't need to do the assessment. Then the question will be how you're going to respond to a significant risk. And the question probably will ask you, what is the impact on the approach? Or what will be the appropriate audit approach in this situation? Some of you is like, when there's significant risk, you guys always answer substantive approach. No, do not do that. Why? Recall what we have go through when we talk about risk of material misstatement, when we talk about response and audit approach. Only there's any indication that the control is not operating effectively, you go to substantive approach. There's a significant risk, doesn't mean the control is not operating effectively. Okay? The question can be something like this. There's a significant risk, but you have performed the test of operating effectiveness and you have performed an understanding evaluation of the control of your client, and the control actually comes back effectively. Although the risk of something go wrong, the risk of material misstatement, the risk, we're only talking about the risk is high or even significant. But actually, if client's control is operating effectively, it can still help you to reduce the risk to an acceptable level. It means in this situation, if the control risk is low, then you can still adopt a combined approach. Then when will you switch to substantive approach? There's one very good indicator. That's what we just learned. Management override of control. If there's a management override of control mentioned in the question, it means that the control is not operating effectively. And because the control not operating effectively, you will likely pick a substantive approach. You do not pick substantive approach solely because the assessment of risk of material misstatement is significant. You only switch from combined approach to substantive approach when the control is not operating effectively. Therefore, you need to look for case fact carefully. Okay, green is case fact, green are case fact. Look for case fact that mention control not operating effectively. For example, just now, my example, there's lack of segregation of duties. There are lack of access control. There are lack of review approval, lack of authorization. Those control keywords, remember, if those control keywords appears and there's something wrong with those control, it may be an indication the control is not operating effectively. That is when you switch to approach. Okay? Why I'm using the term switch? Because 99% of the time we will be adopting combined approach. Okay? In real life or in examination. But of course, there are situations. If the question is on this part, it's trying to trick you to whether switch approach or not. Sometimes you need to switch, sometimes you don't. The key is to look for whether any indication the control is not operating effectively. And of course, if you see something like this in the case fact, saying there's a possible internal control deficiency or internal control weaknesses, or maybe the part A of the question is asking you to identify internal control weaknesses in the question. Then part B is asking you the approach, then, or if there's a deficiency, or you would like to switch to substantive approach, or you mentioned you do more substantive testing, perform more substantive audit procedure, something like that. Okay, so this is one important concept you need to be clear. Do not see significant risk then switch to substantive approach. This is incorrect. Okay, I already told you. Okay, don't do that in any of the mock exam or in the real examination. All right, this is please read yourself on how to respond to it. And if the question asks you to respond, just like most of the time, it's a direct copy from my exam guide here. Okay. Next part on the answering approach. Just now, there will be some kind of issue, incident, events that happen, case fact, right? That leads to a higher risk of material misstatement for fraud. Okay, it can be both financial statement level and or the certain level. And in an audit planning stage question, a stage 2A question, you recall what I already teach you is that something green, remember, case fact, that lead to something pink. Okay? You need to mention the use of case fact to support a possible mistake. But in this part of the exam guide here, it is specifically the difference again due to fraud, these three words. And this time, we are looking for fraud risk factors. Okay? So if the question you have to do the identification whether this is a stage 2A question or not. If it is a stage 2A question and you identify it as a fraud-related question, then your assessment of risk of material misstatement will be focusing on fraud or fraud risk factors. For example, then you mention something like this. There's a risk of excessive pressure for the management to meet the requirements or expectation of third parties. Or you say something like the management is required to meet probability or other requirements on this thing or something. Sometimes it can be like a bank loan. The client is trying to get a loan from the bank. That's why the client got pressure to do fraudulent financial reporting, because the company need to get a bank loan. You need a prettier financial statements. Okay, and the key point here is you need to use this wording. Okay, even if the question or the case fact or the question this did not explicitly mention something like that, this is your hand or your pen to describe this event as something that will lead to fraud. Okay, it's all about your own English description. It can be written to be a risk of material misstatement due to error, or it can be written to be a risk of material misstatement due to fraud. Purely depends on how you describe it. So the difference here is still doing screen that leads to something pink, but you need to change the description that link it to fraud. So think as worst as possible in the examination. Always think of the worst scenario that can happen out of a certain case fact, right? And the question actually sometimes will explicitly ask you to identify fraud risk factors. If you see this, you are referencing to this part of the exam guide, not the part on risk of material misstatement. Okay, so if we flip back to the part on risk of material misstatement at a certain level, okay, this part on page 42, or you can see here, okay, I mentioned there are a bunch of case facts or factors that will lead to a higher risk of material misstatement, and actually, fraud risk factor is one of them. Okay, so of course, if I'm generally asking you to assess the risk of material misstatement at financial statement level, or even at a particular assertion level, you will still to mention possible fraud risk. Okay, even if the question is not explicitly asking you on fraud, it can be one of the items that support your assessment or evaluation of the risk of material misstatement. Okay, you can use it in normal situation. What I'm trying to say, going back to the part of fraud, is when the question is specifically asking you for fraud risk factor. If the question again is explicitly asking you for fraud risk factors, or you identify this question is related to fraud, then when you do risk of material misstatement assessment, you can only mention fraud risk factors. You cannot mention other inherent risk or other items. Okay, if the question is specifically asking you to assess the risk of material misstatement due to fraud, or ask you to look for fraud risk factor, this column here is how you describe the situation. Okay, the concept is the same. You can see I put dot here. This because I want you to use this kind of description. Okay, for example, use words like this: manipulate, aggressive, and sometimes you need to use some data or calculation to support. What kind of data? My example just now, the facts mentioned that the management changed the useful life of the motor vehicle from 10 years to 30 years. For example, this is a logistic company. It got like 50 different trucks. Okay, it changed all the useful life of the trucks from 10 years to 30 years. Then it saved a lot of expenses. The financial statement will look very good that year. Okay, these are the data or some kind of calculation that you need to use to support that the client is probably doing some manipulation of the financial performance of the company. Okay, these are other situations that you can say. Okay, the company is experiencing rapid growth. What is the indicator? It is the case where I mentioned something like the company mention like multiple locations or multiple countries, multiple cities, okay? Or a suddenly increase in dividend, okay? Last year is $1 per share. This year is like $10 per share. Or if the company is experiencing like liquidity problem, then this is some kind of pressure. What I mentioned just now may be related to getting a bank loan because the company is in like a net current liability situation. And if this liquidity problem, a bank loan problem, it will link to another topic we will talk about during completion. I'm talking about going concern problem, liquidity problem, going concern problem, and it can be something that created pressure for the management to manipulate the financial performance of the financial result. Okay, so you need to look for these factors here and these 4 risk factors. Okay, please read it and know how to describe it. One more thing. I want you to do this when you go back home after today's lecture. I mentioned some factors here that will increase the risk of material misstatement at financial statement level. You can see risk of material misstatement at financial statement level. And compared to these 4 risk factors, you will find the similarities of the factors. Okay, so you will need to learn when you compare to these 4 risk factors, you will find the similarities of the factors. Okay, so you will need to learn when to describe the factors that will lead to a RMM due to fraud, or generally just a possible risk of material misstatement that leads to a higher risk at the financial statement level. So you need to compare these 2 sections by yourself and get familiar on how to describe the risk. Okay, the only thing I need you to do it on your own is to learn and practice how to properly describe a risk of material misstatement. If you are not able to do that, or you are not able to tell the difference between RMM at financial statement level and assertion level, or an assertion level due to fraud, if you are not able to tell the differences, and you are not able to properly describe the risk in different situations, I can guarantee you will not pass this examination. Okay? This is a very important thing that you must learn how to do, because this is something that I cannot help you. I put everything here, but what to put in the answer of which question, that's depend on you, and how you describe the exact case and describe the problem is up to you. I already put down almost all the factors or all the case facts that appears in past paper or previous exam. The only thing you need to do is identify them and properly describe the situation. Okay, this is extremely important. Okay, if you get nothing out of this 10 lecture from me, one thing that you need to take away from this 10 lecture on this module is what I'm telling you now. You need to how to describe it. Because if you fail to properly describe or assess the risk of material misstatement, if the next part of question will likely to ask you for audit procedures or audit responses related to the assessed risk of material misstatement. If you do this first part wrong, technically your second part will not score you anything, because you are not describing or preparing procedures to deal with the correct risk of material misstatement. So this is the first thing that you must do properly in this examination before you go learn how to write audit procedures. Writing audit procedures is actually the easiest part when you know how to tell the differences of different type of risk of material misstatement. Okay, procedure is easy, straightforward. All right, then when there is a fraud incident that happens, okay, if in the case that it mentions something, if and what I should call an actual fraud, okay, so put down the word actual. Really, someone is stealing money from the company. It's not suspected. It's called talking about actual. If you identify something like that, the official easiest change the nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures. Fraud. The first response, you're always in your answer. The first response to fraud for an audit execution stage or a phase 2B question, your response is to change the nature, timing, and extent of procedures. And then, such as this is how or what you need to do to change the nature and timing and extent. This is the answer. So please memorize the sentences when it is related to fraud. You will likely need to mention this particular sentence in your answer. Okay, so again, something you need to memorize. Okay, this is not an open book exam. Okay, the open book concept is fake. Okay, it's a scheme, it's a scam. Okay, it just led you to do scar. Here below are other responses that you may need to do, and this part is specifically for management override of control. Okay, I should use green here. Okay, if the question or case fact mentions something management override of control, these are the specific responses we need to put in. Okay, for management override of control. So when do you need to put this part? Is when you identify as management override of control. If it is just a normal fraud incident, or some misappropriation of asset is not related to fraudulent financial reporting, not related to management override of control, this is your response. Okay, if it is related to management override of control, you will need to add these procedures. Okay, hear me clearly, yes, adding these procedures. Okay, so normally fraud you will still need to do this, but if specifically for management override of control, these are the further items you need to add in your answer. Okay, this is how you use my exam guide. You need to properly pinpoint the question by the case fact and then pick the correct table to structure your answer or referencing your answer. But of course, I'm asking you to do this referring back to my exam guide when you practice past paper, not during the examination, because you don't have time to read and think. That's why when you study, you need to be familiar with the items or information in my exam guide. Okay, I cannot stop stressing this. All right.
On to question number 3. So let's look at the question together first. This is a typical question. In this case, the question asks you to evaluate and explain the RMM. Okay, and the question already given you the instruction and as well as the accounts caption here. So it can be quite straightforward. So let's mark it down first. This is a question on RMM, and the account caption is accounts payable, and we have completeness here. So you will need to be able to tell whether the risk of material misstatement is high or low in this case. So it's related to completeness, and part B here is in response to the risk. Assess the risk in part A, therefore it's related to the completeness assertion and asking you for the relevant audit procedures. So we can mark it down first, and this is a stage 2A question, and this is a stage 2B question, which is looking for audit procedures. And this part you need to look for the relevant case fact to support your assessment of the RMM. So this question is a little bit tricky. You do have an answer, I suggest the answer that wants you to go a certain way, but let's look at the case fact first. I will tell you what is tricky part here. First of all, algebra is a department store, so it got over 5,000 local and overseas suppliers. So the question trying to tell you is quite complicated. There's a lot of supplier. So if you're just looking at this, because we're talking about completeness of the accounts payable, we are afraid that some of the accounts payable that are missing. So this is regarding the completeness. Therefore, when the company got 5,000 suppliers, so it looks like the risk of material misstatement for the completeness is quite high, because when the number is too much or it's a little bit complex and hard to keep track, then it may suggest a high risk of material misstatement. But let's look at the following case facts. And this talk about something regarding the 2022 December 31st audit. Okay, this part is talking about last year audit. We are at 2023 December 31st, but this paragraph is actually talking about 2022. So you need to be extremely careful during the examination. If the question is trying to tell you something about previous year, it is either a very good thing, the examiner is trying to tell you something good about a company that it suggests you to low risk, or something bad happened in previous year that will result in a high risk of material misstatement. Our previous year experience as an auditor will affect our assessment as a risk of material misstatement of the current year audit. All right. So what happened last year is that some of the confirmation last year indicating that the balance did not agree with the supplier's record. So something wrong with the reply on the confirmation. Okay. Not particularly something wrong, but something inconsistent or something not agreeing with the supplier's record come back from the confirmation. It happens because sometimes the people answering the confirmation don't actually read the confirmation carefully. So when they answer, something do not agree, but eventually the important thing here is the word but here. Okay, the question is saying something wrong, but it could be recognized. So when something could be recognized and explained, this is very important in examination. During examination, if you see the question saying something can be reconciled and explained by the client, it means there is no problem with it. Of course, in the first sentences, you see that something called do not agree. When you say do not agree, it seems not a good thing, right? But you see the word but here, and it can be recognized as explained. It means the problem is being solved. Remember, during our whole audit process, whenever we identify a problem, no matter it's internal control or even going concern problem, we have same practice. So when there's a internal control that is having some problem deficiency, we look for whether there's mitigating control to solve the problem. If there's effective mitigating control, we do not regard this as the control as having problem. For going concern, there's material uncertainty regarding going concern, but when we have mitigating factors to solve the situation, then we may not have a going concern problem. So same concept applying here. When we do an audit procedures that's got not so good, the result is not so good, it doesn't mean we do not have sufficient appropriate evidence. It just means that we need to have follow-up procedures to further check the problem. So this question is asking you, or this case facts here is telling you that in previous year audit procedure, something is not adding up, but after further procedures, after follow-up, it can be reconciled and explained. So this is your examiner ways to tell you that there is no problem here. So in this case, as I'm already telling you the answer, so this actually suggests the risk of material misstatement is going down, okay? Therefore, not really a high risk of material misstatement in the case. Of course, we will further look at the below information here. It is talking about the accounts payable team got a new process, okay? Again, a word that we love and hate, okay? So something new. Something new is something good to us because we will likely use this in our answer. So we need to do something to tackle with this new process. Okay, this process is talking about having a reconciliation to the monthly statement for this overseas supplier here. And again, the question is telling you any variances is properly followed up by the accounts payable team and then properly approved by Christina. So we have a new internal control here. It can be a good thing, or it can be a bad thing. It depends on how you're going to do it or how you're going to present the case facts in order to support your own answer. Of course, here you can see, I already say it is going down. So if you pick that it is a low risk, in this case, you need to go low risk as well on this new process here. You need to be able to tell that actually with this new internal control process, the RMM is still going down. Okay, so the problem here is in this RMM triangle, you are either going high or you are going low. Always in examination. Agree? Most of the time you will go high, but sometimes the question actually wants you to go down or go low. But no, don't worry. As long as you can use the relevant case facts to support your answer, no matter you go with a high risk of material misstatement or low risk of material misstatement, as long as your answer is logical and presented in a good way, then your examiner will give you marks for this. Therefore, I always ask you to read the question carefully and feel whether the examiner wants you to go high or go low. I deliberately pick this question and make it look like this. So it sounds like high risk, but it can be low risk at the same time. Therefore, it depends on how you present the answer with your case facts. So, in this case, you will have to pick whether it's high or low first. In the suggested solution, I pick low. Therefore, when you present the case facts, you present it something like this. Last year results, no misstatement was found, and everything could be reconciled and explained by algebra. So it means there is no problem. And then in addition, the management has strengthened the internal control by performing a new monthly reconciliation to the supply statement for overseas supplier. So these two things add together. The control regarding the accounts payable has been improved during the year. Therefore, the risk of material misstatement is low. But of course, you may be thinking it is a high risk of material misstatement. It is not a problem. You just need to tweak the case fact into supporting your own answer. Here is the suggested solution for a low risk of material misstatement. Then, what if I want to go high? If you want to go high in this case, please use the case facts about here. You can say the risk is higher because algebra got 5,000 local and overseas supplier. It is very easy for the company to miss out some of the supplier when they deal with the accounts payable. If you use this case facts, you can support a risk of material misstatement that go high with the 5,000 supplier. And then for this new process, instead of saying the management has strengthened the control, you can use the facts that Christina is the new general manager. And as well, the monthly reconciliation is also a new internal control procedures. You can say that a new management introducing a new internal control procedures or internal control process. The staff may not be familiar with it, and Christina may not be familiar with the process. So something might run wrong with this new control. We will have to test it first before we can tell whether it's actually strengthened the control or not. So at this point, by just looking at having this new control, you can say the risk of material misstatement actually is higher. In the examination, most of the time you do not get to pick whether it's high or low. Most of the time it's so obvious in the facts that you will go high. But this question here, I deliberately make it like this so you can practice a question to use different case fact to support your answer. The point is really you need to determine your answer first. That's why I keep asking you to read the question carefully, then plan your answer before you start writing. So you pick either high risk of material misstatement or low risk of material misstatement. Then you use the relevant case fact to support your assessment or evaluation of the ROMM. Understood what I'm saying? In the examination, please read carefully. Do the answer planning, okay? So moving on to part B here. Because this first part here, talking about a complete solo account receivable, and then it is asking you for audit procedures. And the case fact mentioned the new control and mentioned the confirmation, etc., etc. And your audit procedures should be in response to the assessed risk of material misstatement in Part A. But you use these case facts to support your ROMM assessment. Therefore, when you answer Part B, the audit procedures, your audit procedures should be tailor-made and be relevant to the case facts you used to support your assessment in Part A. Because you name something, some case facts, something that in your client that may cause problem on the risk of material misstatement. Therefore, your audit procedure should be focusing on those areas which have possible problem. For example, because there's a new process, you should update the entire internal control understanding of your client. And for this new control, you have to test it, agree? You already test a lot of different control procedure. But if this is a new control procedure introduced by your client, in your first year seeing this particular internal control, you must understand its design and test the operating effectiveness of this new control before you can say whether the control is actually improved or not, or actually the new control make the whole process even worse than before. You never know it before you test it. So if you go look at the answer, you will see that the first part of the question, the whole first part of this audit procedures here is talking about the internal control process. So this is basically test of control. Regarding the whole purchase and payable process, see, this is the name of the process. When we talk about internal control, there will always be a particular process you can cover. And if you use it in your answer, it will definitely help you to get more marks because it will make your examiner know that you know what you're doing. I'm testing our understanding of the purchase to payable process. Obviously, because this question is talking about accounts payables, therefore it's from purchase of inventory to the relevant payables process. You need to update your understanding because something has changed. And you will need to test the monthly reconciliation, okay? And to prove and to check and to review how Christina actually performed the internal control procedures, how Christina reviewed the reconciliation, and how Christina approved the reconciliation. Any problem in between, and you need to test it. Therefore, you can see half of the marks here is covering the relevant internal control and relevant test of control of the purchase and payable process. You see how your examiner will want the answer, the audit procedure of Part B related to the information you use in Part A to assess the risk of material misstatement. When this is talking about internal control, you should be performing test of control procedures. And of course, Normal substantive procedures in this case will still be applied or will still get you marks because the question just generally asks you for audit procedures. But you need to be careful that the marking scheme, they may allocate a certain marks to talk about the specific test of control regarding the risk of material misstatement you identified and evaluate in Part A. Certain mark will be allocated to that. Therefore, if you just answer these substantive procedures here, okay, these substantive procedures, you may only score around half of the marks because the question may be looking for both procedures because it is because in Part A when you assess and evaluate the risk of material misstatement, it talks about the internal control and then new control process. Then it is obvious that the examiner would like you to update your understanding of the control and then evaluate and validate the relevant control procedures. And of course, sending confirmation, search for unrecorded liabilities. These are standard procedure accounts for accounts payable. But you need to be careful. We are talking about completeness. Normally, search for unrecorded liability is a very good procedure for completeness of accounts payable because you are searching for unrecorded liability. This is in the name, but you need to describe it properly. And look at this, confirmation. Normally, confirmation is not an audit procedure that can deal with the completeness assertion because you can only send confirmation to the people you know or to those creditors that have balances on your account. But we change the method. We send the confirmation. It will help us to deal with another assertion. In this case, I will select local and overseas supplier that actually have businesses during the year but with zero balance as at the year end to send the confirmation to confirm some of this supplier actually don't have balance at the end of the year. I want to confirm the zero balance. It is in this case, if I can confirm zero balances, it means there's no completeness problem. Of course, I may it depends on how you select the local and overseas supplier. So the important part here is to select those with zero balance. Of course, if you need to be more clear, you should select those with transaction during the year but zero balance at the end. When you send confirmation, it can provide you with a little bit evidence on completeness. Therefore, as I always say, it is how you describe the audit procedure that will score you mark instead of what that particular procedure is doing. For example, when you just say send confirmation or you just say check contract, check sales and purchase agreement, and you didn't say how you send it or what are you checking in the contract, then you may not score any mark. Remember, your audit procedure need to be as specific as possible, especially if there are actual case facts that you can use. For example, in this case, there's actually a new monthly reconciliation that you can perform test of control on. You should mention it in your answer. That's why you need to read the case fact carefully, and when you do assessment of RMM or you are writing audit procedures, you can apply this information in the case fact into your answer to make sure you can get marks when you write down this paragraph or write down these procedures. Otherwise, there's a huge risk that you write down something that you think is the correct answer but actually score you nothing. All right, so this is question number 3.